From the moment I was born, I knew that our clan had produced a concubine who was the favorite of the emperor. It was said that the emperor loved her deeply, and after her death, all the favored concubines bore a resemblance to her in their features. As I grew older, the clan members were delighted to discover not only did I resemble her in appearance, but my temperament was also identical to hers. They all said that the Song clan was about to produce another concubine. The night before I was sent to the capital, my mother held me tightly and wept. They say the palace is a place that devours people without mercy. Your aunt may have been favored, but it was only superficial glory. Otherwise, she wouldn't have died so young. Why would you want to jump into such an abyss? I knew that. Of course. Because in my previous life, I had died a tragic death in the palace. Welcome to my channel. If you like this story, please click to subscribe. There are more wonderful stories waiting for you to listen to. Chapter 1. From the moment I was born, I never cried or made a fuss. Because I was born with memories from my previous life. Coincidentally, I was reincarnated into the same family in both lives. However, in my previous life, I was the legitimate daughter of the Ningyuan Marquis mansion, while in this life, I was born into a lowly official's family, merely a branch of the Marquis' household. From the moment I was born, I knew that the clan had produced a concubine who was the emperor's favorite. The Ningyuan Marquis family was mediocre, but they had produced this one concubine, and the entire family benefited from her favor. However, though the concubine was favored, she had already passed away before I was born. It was said that the emperor loved the concubine deeply, and after her death, the concubines by his side all bore a resemblance to her in their features. The legitimate mother of the Marquis' mansion could no longer contain herself. Under the pretext of the old lady's birthday banquet, she searched the clan for a woman who resembled the concubine. At the age of 5, I was led by my mother into the gates of the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion. With no one to guide us, my mother became lost in the vast mansion. She was so anxious that sweat beaded on her forehead. Your father couldn't come because of official business. I'm already late for the old lady's birthday celebration. This will surely lead to your father being scolded as well. I pointed to a small path and said in a childish voice, "Mother, there's another path over there." Through that path, my mother quickly reached the main hall. She stroked my head and said, "Our mayor is so clever, you found the right path right away." It wasn't that I was clever. It was just that I had grown up here in my previous life. So I naturally remembered the way. I recognized my biological mother from my previous life at a glance. She was still the matriarch of the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion, as elegant and majestic as ever. Even though her beloved daughter was gone, there were no gray hairs at her temples. She remained as radiant as before. She surveyed the women of the clan, furrowing her brows slightly. "They're all just ordinary women, they can't compare to Muyao." My mother led me forward to pay respects, but she didn't recognize me. However, Zhao Yang, standing nearby, looked surprised. "This little girl looks exactly like the young miss when she was a child." My biological mother from my previous life only glanced at me before turning away indifferently. It made sense. Her eyes were fixed on my good-for-nothing younger brother. I had been raised by a wet nurse in the mansion. She didn't remember what I looked like as a child. Nor did she care. All she cared about was whether this mansion could produce another concubine to pave the way for her son's future. In my previous life, I had few relatives. But in this life, I finally have a mother who truly loves me. I tugged at my mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mother, let's go." 2. After presenting the birthday gifts, my mother and I were seated in a side hall. The people sitting in the side hall were all strangers I had never seen before in my previous life. And even the servants serving tea were unfamiliar. I quietly ate the pastries my mother handed me, listening to the women in the side hall chatting animatedly. "Did you all see that? The Ningyuan Marquis mansion sure knows how to put on a show. Even the current emperor sent birthday gifts to the old lady. The emperor remembers their old affection. Even though the Rhone noble consort is gone, he will still treat her family generously. Such blessings are something our family could never hope to attain in several lifetimes. I sneered inwardly. The favor Xinyan showed me was nothing but poison coated in honey. In my previous life, when I was still alive, my reputation was far from good. Everyone in the capital knew that the emperor and empress were harmonious and deeply in love, and I was merely the demonic concubine standing between them. Though I was beautiful, I wasn't particularly favored when I first entered the palace. It wasn't until Xinyan discovered me that he began to favor me more and more, and the empress grew increasingly jealous. Whenever the empress was angry with him, he would summon me to his side. Within a few days, the empress would soften her stance. In Xinyan's eyes, I wasn't even a substitute, I was merely a beautiful plaything that aroused the empress's jealousy. Yet at that time, I loved him with all my heart. Over time, he inevitably developed genuine feelings for this plaything. During a hunting trip, when an assassin struck, I instinctively stepped in front of Xinyan to protect him. The arrow pierced my chest, and Xinyan carried me back to the palace, covered in blood. As my consciousness faded, Xinyan held my hand and said in a trembling voice, Once your wounds heal, we'll start over. In the past, when he was moved, he would only call me Roru. This was the first time he had ever called me Io. However, I didn't understand the meaning behind his words. After I recovered, Xinyi issued an edict promoting me to Rongfei, and the imperial chefs in the kitchen were replaced. 2 years after entering the palace, I had not conceived, but shortly after being granted the title of concubine, I was diagnosed by the imperial physician as pregnant. I eagerly awaited the birth of the child, hoping that in this deep palace, I would finally have someone to rely on. However, I gave birth prematurely and hemorrhaged, and the child did not survive. After the miscarriage, I would dream every night of my child's lifeless body covered in bruises, waking up in tears from the nightmare. After losing my child, my mind gradually began to unravel. Everyone thought I would make Xinyi despise me, but to everyone's surprise, he grew even more compassionate toward me. I cried and screamed wildly, scratching Xinye's face until it bled. He only held me tightly in his arms, looking at me with guilt and comforting me. Giving birth is too painful. We will never have children again. I had no children, yet I was granted the title of Empress Consort. I was the most favored woman in the palace. Yet I was sometimes lucid and sometimes mad. My madness was kept hidden. Xinyan often came to visit me, his face also bearing bloodstains. He would only tell the ministers that he had adopted a mischievous cat. When I was lucid, I could sense his deep affection for me. But his deep affection became my death sentence. The empress accompanied Xinyan to the throne, but his eyes gradually lost their spark for her. Even when I had lost my mind, Xinyan still pampered me. No matter how virtuous she pretended to be, she could no longer tolerate me. In the days that followed, I grew increasingly lucid. During one lucid moment, I stared at the butterfly outside the window and murmured, "Flower, flower." The maid smiled at me and said, "Is the Empress Consort wanting to see the flowers? Let me take you to the garden." I rarely went out, but that day I chased the butterfly out of the sleeping quarters. I wasn't completely mad yet. In the imperial garden, I encountered the Empress, who was enjoying the flowers with the second prince, and I remembered to bow. The Empress saw me and smiled gently, but her words were sharp. The Empress Consort has finally come to her senses. There are some things I won't tell you now, but you'll never know them in this lifetime. You don't know, do you? The emperor's affection for you is merely to make me jealous. He knows I despise you. So to ease my mind, he had cold medicine added to your daily meals. Your body is no longer suitable for childbirth. Which is why, despite all the tonics you've been taking, you gave birth to a stillborn child. You don't really think the emperor cares about you, do you? Even your title is a nickname I used in my youth. You, the Rome noble consort, you're nothing but a joke. Seeing me in this state, the empress should be delighted. But the hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. The old nurse by her side held my hands and took a golden hairpin from my head. Handing it to her, she took the hairpin and slashed it across her son's arm with all her strength. The child's cries snapped me back to reality. They finally let go of me. The guards slowly withdrew their swords, their cold blades reflecting my pale face. I collapsed to the ground and raised my eyes to ask her, "Empress, you must have plotted this for a long time to eliminate me, right?" She slowly leaned down and smiled at me. "I never intended to take your life. I merely added a drug to the perfume you use daily to cloud your mind. Yet even so, you were still too much of an eyesore." I stared at the blood-stained golden hairpin before me and asked in a trembling voice, "I won't survive today, right?" The empress stood straight, looking down at me with a cruel smile. "I have spared your wretched life until now, it is your good fortune." Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly let out a piercing scream. I picked up the golden hairpin from the ground and stabbed her with all my strength. Chaos erupted around us, with screams and chaos filling the air. The blade pierced my chest, and I collapsed to the ground. Blood mist swirled before my eyes, and I saw Shuangwen rushing toward me in panic. The empress covered her face, blood seeping through her fingers. The old nurse by her side reacted, cradling the 2-year-old second prince and kneeling before Shuangwen. "Your Majesty." The empress consort suddenly went mad and attempted to assassinate the empress and the prince. Shuangwen didn't glance at them, kneeling on the ground and holding me tightly. He ordered someone to summon the imperial physician, his voice nearly torn apart. He held me so tightly that my entire body ached. My body temperature dropped rapidly as blood flowed from my chest. Thankfully, the pain subsided quickly. 3. I died. Yet I didn't die. I was reincarnated and became human once more. In this life, I have loving parents and don't have to bear the expectations of being a high-born noblewoman like in my previous life. I can grow up freely. If I didn't have the memories of my previous life, I would probably marry a virtuous husband, raise children, and live an ordinary life, just as my mother had hoped. But I can't forget the hatred of my previous life. In my previous life, I and my child who did not survive were already buried in a grave, our bodies long since rotted away. But the person who killed us is still living comfortably in the palace. The older I grow, the clearer those memories become, and the more beautiful I become. My mother began to worry and discussed my marriage with my father. Once Mayor comes of age, we should marry her off. You've always been so doting on your daughter, how could you bear to marry her off? Mayor is too beautiful. If the people from the Ningyuan Marquis mansion were to see her, I also hope she marries into a good family soon. My father sighed. To be honest, the prefect has approached me several times in private, saying his son has set his sights on our mayor and wants to marry her as a concubine. The prefect's son? He's just a rogue. How could we let Mayor marry him as a concubine? Absolutely out of the question. Madam, don't worry. The prefect has mentioned it several times, but I've refused each time. As I walked into the room carrying the soup, my parents' voices suddenly fell silent. I asked softly, "Father, you're just a lowly clerk. Why would the prefect come looking for you?" My father picked up a steamed bun and took a bite, dismissively saying, "It's nothing important." Over the years, my father had been an honest, lowly official, unaware of the corrupt practices in the bureaucracy. He thought that by refusing the prefect's offers, I could escape this fate. In their eyes, we were nothing but ants. The next day, as I was leaving the embroidery shop, I was stopped by Guisheng. You don't really think that with your father protecting you, you can escape from this young master's grasp, do you? I showed no panic on my face. Just stood there quietly looking at him. Why are you in such a hurry, Mr. Gua? With my background, how could I dare to refuse you? Guisheng laughed upon hearing this. You're more sensible than your father. I had him locked up in prison and beaten twice, but he still refused to agree to marry you to me. I clenched my fists tightly and stared at him. I'm willing to marry you. Will you release my father? Of course. Once you come of age, I'll send someone to propose marriage. He narrowed his eyes, his gaze lingering on me, his sticky stare making me want to vomit. Don't worry. Once you marry me, I'll treat you well. He reached out to touch my face, but I dodged him without a trace. I smiled at him. I thought I had a choice, but it turns out you've forced me into this. He didn't understand the meaning behind my words. However, Guisheng saw that I was being reasonable and agreed not to come bother us before I came of age. My father was released, and our family finally had a peaceful life for a while. My mother's hometown was in a small village on the border, and my father began planning to take me and my mother there to start a new life. But Guisheng's men were watching our house every day, and we couldn't find an opportunity to leave. When my father was at a loss, he received a letter from the Ningyuan Marquis's mansion. A month earlier, I had gone to the Wan'an temple to pray for blessings and encountered Zhao Yang, who was visiting her relatives. When she saw me, she was so frightened that she twisted her ankle. I helped her to the pavilion, and she trembled as she touched my warm hand, staring at me in disbelief. Miss, how did you come back to life? You must have mistaken me for someone else, I said, looking at the token at her waist. It turns out you're from the Ningyuan Marquis mansion. As it happens, our family is distantly related to the Marquis mansion. Zhao Yang snapped back to her senses, asked my name, and hurried back to the capital. When my father received the letter, the carriages of the Ningyuan Marquis mansion had already left the capital. They've set their sights on Mayor again. My mother threw the letter into the stove, composed herself, and said to my father, "Why don't we flee in the middle of the night?" My mother gave her gold bracelet to my father, who went to the pawn shop to sell it, but was discovered by Guisheng's men. Guisheng kidnapped me to his mansion and threatened to kill my parents if I dared to think of escaping again. Though our family has no power or influence, we are still a collateral branch of the Ningyuan Marquis mansion. The mansion's people are already on their way to bring me to the capital for the imperial selection. I whispered to him, "Your father is only a prefect, he can't afford to offend the mansion's people. With the Ningyuan Marquis mansion backing us, our words carry weight." He stared at me with a sinister smile. "If you're not a virgin, you can't participate in the selection. What protection can the Marquis mansion offer you then?" As he spoke, he rushed forward and pushed me onto the table. Outside the door, the shouts of Gua the prefect could be heard. "Guisheng, you dare not touch her. She's the maiden the Marquis mansion is sending to the palace. You ungrateful son. If you touch her, our family will be ruined. Don't make me do something foolish." Gua Zhifu pounded on the door, making it shake violently. Guisheng seemed not to hear him, continuing to tear at my clothes. He undid his belt, his foul breath spraying onto my face. "Soon, you'll be mine." Men are truly creatures who think with their lower bodies. In his moment of passion, I reached for the dagger hidden at my waist and stabbed him fiercely in the neck. The foul-smelling blood splattered my face. I endured the nausea and stabbed him several more times until he stopped breathing. Guizhifu pushed open the door and saw his son lying in a pool of blood. He fainted on the spot. I washed the blood off my body and, when I saw the people from the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion, I returned to my usual gentle demeanor. I said, I am willing to go to the capital for the imperial selection. However, since Guizhifu's son died because of me, they must take care of my parents. My father and mother received a large sum of silver and were arranged to leave the next day. On the night before our departure, my mother hugged me and cried uncontrollably. They say the palace is a place that devours people without mercy. Your aunt's favor was merely superficial glory, otherwise she wouldn't have met such a tragic end at such a young age. Why would you willingly jump into such an abyss? I knew all this. Of course. Because in my previous life, I was Song Muyao, who met a tragic end in the depths of the palace. I patted my mother's back and whispered comfortingly, but if I don't go to the palace, our entire family will starve to death. I would rather die than drag my parents down with me. My father, upon hearing this, silently wiped away tears in the corner. In my previous life, my family treated me with such coldness. I never imagined that in this life, I would be loved so deeply by my parents. At least I haven't lived in vain. I boarded the carriage heading to the capital, while my father and mother departed by boat from Huainan. I heard that the legitimate wife of the Marquis of Bo had seen my portrait and was very pleased. Zhao Ma said to her that even my temperament was as gentle and kind as Song Muyao's. If they were looking for a substitute for Song Muyao, there was no one better in the world than me. Before I even reached the capital, rumors began to spread that the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion was about to produce another imperial concubine. However, these rumors were quickly suppressed before they could spread further. Soon, news came from the palace. The northern regions were suffering from a severe drought, with barren land stretching for hundreds of miles. To raise funds for disaster relief, the emperor had issued an edict canceling this year's imperial selection. The drought in the north had already lasted for over 2 months. Yet the imperial selection was cancelled at this critical moment. There was no need to guess who was behind this. It was widely rumored in the capital that the empress was leading the way in frugality, setting an example of virtue. I never expected that after 16 years. She still feared me so much. However, I had already anticipated that she would not allow me to enter the palace easily. After arriving in the capital, the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion began to go to great lengths to place me before Xinye's eyes. They hired musicians to teach me music and dance. It seems that the path I walked in my previous life, I must walk again in this one. But they don't know how much the empress fears my face, which is identical to Song Muyao's. What they're doing will only hasten my death. Fortunately, I have other options besides the imperial selection. I went to the Zuixiang pavilion wearing a veil. The assassins the empress had arranged followed me into the tavern. He poisoned my tea, but the poison did not take effect immediately. The assassin grew impatient and disguised himself as a servant, bringing in a plate of pastries. As he drew his dagger, I scattered the perfume powder I held in my hand toward him and ran toward the corridor. In the chaos, I stumbled and knocked over a screen standing in the corner. I knelt on the ground, propping myself up with my hands. Before I could react, a silver flash suddenly darted toward my throat, the cold blade grazing my skin. My veil was torn aside by the swordsman's blade. I looked up at the nobleman before me, tears welling in my eyes, and said, "Someone is trying to kill me. Please save me, young master." He lowered his gaze at me, a fleeting look of astonishment in his eyes, and said to his guards, "Do not harm her." The cold blade moved away from my neck, leaving a faint trail of blood. The elegantly dressed man took 2 steps forward, but his guards whispered a warning. "Your Highness, be careful. She might be an assassin." He ignored them, stepped forward, and helped me to my feet, his gaze falling on the jade pendant at my waist. Do you remember me? When I was a child, I got lost at Shuangwen Temple. And you saved me. I froze. My expression filled with astonishment. He just called you, Your Highness. Shuangwen revealed his identity to me, telling me he was the crown prince of the current dynasty. How could I not know who he was? The tablet of the Empress Dowager's mother was enshrined at Shuangwen Temple, and she would go there every year to pay her respects. 8 years ago, Shuangwen got lost in the temple, and I recognized his identity from the fabric of his clothes and the scar on his arm. I lured him into a hunter's trap with a rabbit and saved him when he was most helpless. After saving him, I casually mentioned that the jade on his hat was beautiful. He then gave me the jade with the auspicious cloud pattern. Shuangwen asked me in a low voice, I remember your name is Yun Mei. I lowered my eyes. Avoiding his intense gaze, Your Highness still remembers. His eyes fixed on me, I sent people to search for you before. I looked at him with tears in my eyes, if I hadn't met Your Highness today. I fear. Shuangwen held my hand, his gaze growing deeper. With me here, no one in the capital dares to harm you. I shyly lowered my eyes, my smile not reaching my eyes. Years ago, I had devised a plan to save him, merely to ensure my own survival in the future. I never expected him to remember me for so many years. He was quite the romantic, even sparing the need for love potions. I was placed in Shuangwen's villa, with guards assigned to protect me. With him watching over me, the Empress couldn't dare to touch me. Shuangwen told me to follow him and move into the Eastern Palace. I nodded and requested the status of a concubine. Shuangwen's crown princess had already been betrothed to the eldest daughter of the prime minister's family. He felt that the status of a concubine was insufficient for me, so he sent all the rare treasures from his palace to my courtyard. Among them was a hairpin adorned with an Eastern pearl, which I greatly admired. I wore it to the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet at the prime minister's mansion. The Ningyuan Marquis's mansion had gone to great lengths to arrange this, hoping I could make an appearance before Shuangwen. However, Xinyu did not show up, and I was seated in the most inconspicuous corner of the banquet hall. As dusk fell, the noble women around me suddenly noticed that the pearl on my hairpin was emitting a lustrous glow. It was a night pearl. How extravagant to have such a large night pearl embedded in a hairpin. How could a lowly orphan like me possibly deserve such a precious treasure? After that night, rumors began to spread. They all said I was shameless, having climbed into the bed of some powerful official in the capital. In an instant, my reputation was ruined. To prevent me from marrying into the Eastern Palace, the Empress even threatened to take her own life, forcing Shuangwen to sever all ties with me. I clenched my palms tightly, tears welling up in my eyes as I looked at Shuangwen. Now that my reputation is ruined, if the prince abandons me, I truly have no way to survive. But I cannot disregard my mother. Shuangwen looked at me with reluctance, his voice hoarse. Yun Mei, I will take care of everything for you, ensuring you live the rest of your life in peace. I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes, clasped my hands before my brows, and bowed respectfully to him. Yun Mei will not cause the prince any trouble. Upon hearing these words, Shuangwen turned and left. He had not taken a few steps when he heard a shrill scream from behind him. He heard the maid scream, Miss has attempted suicide. Shuangwen stumbled into my room. He snatched the sword from the guard's hand. The sword flashes before my eyes, and the taut white silk snaps with a sharp sound. I fall into Shuangwen's arms. He looks at me with reddened eyes. Why did you do such a foolish thing? I burst into tears. Only if I die will I not drag the prince down with me. He held me tightly, and I could feel him trembling. He was afraid. After a long time, he finally let go of me, staring at the red mark on my neck, and said to me, Yun Mei, I will take you to see the emperor and beg him to agree to let you become my crown princess. Are you going to ask Xinyu to give me a proper title? This is getting more and more interesting. Your Majesty. Will the Emperor agree? You are the woman I truly love. My father will grant my request. As night fell, Shen Huayan brought me into the palace. I changed into a pale purple gown and applied heavier makeup. Shen Huayan helped me down from the carriage, his eyes darkening. Why are you dressed so elaborately? I thought I was going to see the Emperor. I couldn't possibly wear something too plain. I raised my eyes and asked softly, Does your Highness not like it? He smiled. No matter how you are, I like you. Shen Huayan held my hand as we walked along the palace path. The palace attendants who passed by glanced up at us, their faces turning pale with fear. Whispers echoed in my ears. The gentle concubine? It's the gentle concubine. I wore a veil and turned my head to ask Shen Huayan. The gentle concubine is already dead. How can her name still be heard in the palace? Shen Huayan's lips curled into a mocking smile. That madwoman nearly killed me and my mother. Yet the Emperor still thinks of her and even summoned a sorcerer to summon her soul back. That's why everyone says the palace is haunted. As he spoke, he wrapped his arm around my shoulder. Are you afraid? I shook my head. In my previous life, Shen Huayan was only 2 years old when I died. It seems he really doesn't remember anything. Shen Huayan led me into the imperial study. Xinyu was reviewing memorials. Now in his late 30s. He hadn't aged much and looked much the same as he had 16 years ago. Shen Huayan had me kneel down to pay respects. But Xinyu didn't even bother to lift his eyelids. It's so late. What are you doing here? Shen Huayan spoke respectfully. Your Majesty. I have found a woman I love and wish to present her to you. Please grant your permission. Xinyu rubbed his temples. It's just taking a concubine. You may decide for yourself. Father. I do not wish to marry the legitimate daughter of the Prime Minister's family. I only wish to marry Song Yunmei as my wife. Xinyu tossed aside the memorial he was holding, his expression suddenly turning grim. Nonsense. Shen Huayan hurriedly knelt down. Father. Please forgive me. I also hurriedly knelt down beside him. The surroundings fell silent. Time seemed to freeze, and even a pin dropping could be heard. After a long time, I heard Xinye's voice echoing above my head. Look up and let me see you. His voice was cold and stern, but I could still hear a tremor in it. I lowered my eyes and slowly raised my head. The old eunuch beside Xinye shouted harshly. How dare you? You dare to cover your face in the presence of the Emperor. As I removed the veil from my face, I heard the old eunuch gasp in shock, followed by Xinye's heavy breathing. He walked step by step toward me. I kept my head bowed, and the light before my eyes suddenly dimmed. At that moment, Shen Huayan also noticed the unusual look in Xinye's eyes as he looked at me. Confused, he asked, What's wrong, Father? The next moment, Xinye's hand clamped down on my neck with brutal force. Speak! Who sent you here? What did you do to your face? Why do you look exactly like her? He glared at me with eyes bulging, as if he truly intended to kill me. My back was pressed against the pillar, and I struggled to place my hands on his wrists. I looked at him in panic, my eyes red with fear. Xinyu's grip gradually loosened. Shen Huayan was stunned by the scene before him. Father, Yun Mei isn't an assassin. She really isn't. Xinyi finally let go of me. He stared at me, who was collapsed on the ground, and coldly said to Shen Huayan, You cannot marry her, and you cannot take her away. But get out! The veins on Xinye's temples bulged, and he was furious. Shen Huayan had probably never seen him this angry before, so he scrambled away. I was taken to a side hall by palace attendants. Several old maids came in to bathe and dress me, carefully examining every inch of my body to confirm that my appearance wasn't altered by disguise. By now, They must have quickly uncovered my connection to the Ningyuan Marquis mansion. I am, after all, blood related to Song Muyao, sharing the same face. So it's not entirely unexpected. The only stain on my reputation was the murder of Guisheng. However, before I arrived in the capital, the people from the Ningyuan Marquis mansion had already poisoned Guizhifu, erasing that stain from my record. It was not until late at night that Xinyi finally appeared. He stood at the door, his body stiff, staring at me for a long time before slowly approaching. I saw him and cowered in the corner of the bed. No. Don't kill me. His gaze softened, and he lowered his voice. You and Io are too similar. I was startled just now. Your Majesty is referring to my aunt. I raised my eyes and asked timidly, everyone says I look just like my aunt. Even your Majesty can't tell us apart. Xinyi sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me, smiling gently. Did the Ningyuan Marquis bring you to the capital for the imperial selection? I nodded. The smile in his eyes suddenly froze. My imperial selection has been cancelled. So you've latched onto the crown prince? It was clearly him who cancelled the selection. Yet he made it sound like it was my fault. I took a deep breath and spoke slowly. Someone wants to kill me. I can only survive by staying by the crown prince's side. Xinye's eyes flashed with a cold, murderous intent. Who wants to kill you? I don't know. My entire body trembled uncontrollably, like a frightened kitten, and I said in a trembling voice, I only remember that the assassin had a burn scar on the back of his hand. Xinyi embraced me tightly. Don't worry. I will protect you. As long as I am here, no one can harm you. My eyes welled up with tears as I looked at him. The people from the Bo mansion said that if I enter the palace, I can be as favored as my aunt. But I don't want favor. I just want to live a peaceful life. The bruises on my neck, caused by his grip, had already been treated by the attendant. He looked at the faint red marks, seeming slightly pained. Does it still hurt? I steadied myself and whispered. It doesn't hurt anymore. Your Majesty, please don't kill me. Do you see me as a ruthless tyrant who kills without mercy? He laughed softly, his voice growing gentler. By my side, you will not only live a good life, but I will give you anything you desire. I shook my head. I don't want anything. Xinyan's dark eyes gradually filled with desire, and the last remnants of his reason seemed to collapse in an instant. He was already overcome with passion and lowered his head to kiss me. Most of the candles in the hall had burned out, and the flickering candlelight cast a dim glow. When I came to my senses, I found myself pinned to the bed by Xinyan. A warm tear fell onto my collarbone. I heard Xinye's voice grow hoarse. I never thought you would come back. You would come back. I said the same words as in my previous life. Even my tone and expression were identical. How could he not recognize me as Song Muyao? In my previous life, I became Xinye's favorite concubine when I was just beginning to understand love. At that time, I wanted nothing else but a place in his heart. In this life, I want nothing else either. I only want your life. After a night of favor, I was granted the title of noble consort. The news spread throughout the palace, causing an uproar. After all, someone like me, with no background, being granted the title of concubine upon entering the palace, was a first. I was favored exclusively from the moment I entered the palace, staying in Xinyan's side hall for 3 days before moving to the sleeping quarters. In the morning, I went to the cunning palace to pay my respects. Incense smoke curled upward as the empress sat on the phoenix throne. Upon seeing me, her nails dug into the gilded armrest. I bowed respectfully and glanced at her without showing any emotion. She was different from before. Once a noble and virtuous empress who claimed not to use her beauty to please others, she now wore thick layers of makeup. her makeup much more vibrant than before. I looked at the cracked makeup on her right cheek and suppressed a cold smile. It was my stab before I died that ruined her face. Her eyes were bloodshot. But she had to put on the virtuous facade of the Empress. You truly have the same breathtaking beauty as your aunt. No wonder the Emperor favors you. The other concubines covered their mouths and laughed mockingly. You're just a stand-in for the wrong concubine. What's there to be proud of? I hear she comes from a remote countryside. Her background not even as good as that of a commoner's daughter in the capital. But who can blame her for having such a beautiful face? The Empress raised her eyebrows slightly and looked at me. These words were undoubtedly meant for me to hear. She wanted me to understand that in Xinye's eyes, I was nothing more than a substitute. How ridiculous. Who among us here isn't a substitute? Some can dance the same dances. Some can play the same melodies. And some resemble her in appearance and temperament. But among all the concubines in the harem, I am probably the least bothered by being treated as a stand-in. I lowered my eyes and smiled faintly. Yes. This servant entered the palace thanks to a face resembling my aunt's. To have gained the Emperor's favor is truly a stroke of good fortune. The Empress's face turned pale. A foolish concubine spoke up at that moment. I heard that the virtuous concubine wasn't very well behaved before entering the palace and climbed onto a high branch. After she finished speaking, she noticed that the Empress, sitting in her high position, had turned pale, and the thick layer of makeup on her face looked like it was covered in dust. The high-ranking official I had climbed onto before entering the palace was none other than the Empress's own son, the current crown prince. To be precise, I was the one who had been taken away from him by Xinyu. It was said that after that night, shuangwen fell ill and had not gone to pay respects to Xinyu for several days. If this continued, it was uncertain whether the Empress's meticulously planned scheme to secure the crown prince's position for shuangwen would hold. I sat there quietly, gazing at the Empress. Lady Li spoke nonsense. Will the Empress not punish her? The Empress narrowed her eyes and looked at me. What do you think should be done with her? I set down my teacup and spoke softly. Have her dragged out and beaten with 30 strokes, so she can never speak again. Upon hearing this, Lady Li's legs went weak, and she nearly fell from her chair. The Empress laughed coldly. I never would have guessed you were so heartless. I tugged at my lips, my smile not reaching my eyes. This servant is not as gentle as my aunt. I am indeed a bit heartless. However, the Empress was not as cruel as me. She only ordered someone to take Lady Li away and slap her 30 times. When I left, Lady Li's fair face was red and swollen. The person who had been so arrogant just a moment ago now had her hair disheveled and looked truly miserable. She still seemed dissatisfied and glared at me. I walked up to her, raised my hand, and slapped her hard across the face. Blood trickled down the corner of her mouth, splattering on the brick floor. I looked down at her from above. Next time you dare to look at me like that, it won't be just a slap. With those words, I coldly glanced at the other concubines nearby and turned to leave. Having recently gained the Emperor's favor, my reputation for being arrogant and spoiled had already spread throughout the harem, making me the bane of the other concubines. Since that was the case, I might as well solidify my reputation as a villainess. After disciplining Lady Li today, no one dared to provoke me, and I finally had some peace and quiet. Emperor Xinyu was busy with state affairs but still wanted to see me at all times. At lunchtime, he summoned me to dine with him. What quarrel do you have with Lady Li? If you don't like her, I can dismiss her. Lady Li said that I was restless before entering the palace. I am the Emperor's concubine, how dare she speak of such things? That is why I punished her. I put down my chopsticks and looked at him with a look of grievance. I wonder how the Emperor heard about this. Xinye's eyes turned cold. I know your temperament. So I didn't believe what the Empress said. I tugged at my lips. It seems that the Empress doesn't like me. Xinye snorted coldly, and a shadow guard emerged from the darkness. Repeat what you just said. The shadow guard bowed respectfully and said, I have already investigated. The person who attempted to assassinate Lady Shufei that day was a loyal follower of the Duke. Xinyi waved his hand, and the shadow guard withdrew. I looked at him in confusion. Why would the Duke? Xinyi said, the Duke's mansion is the Empress's maternal family. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. Is the Empress Dowager trying to kill me? You and your aunt are so strikingly similar in appearance that it is inevitable she would feel threatened. Xinye's eyes were as sharp as knives, and the corners of his lips curled into a mocking smile. It seems my Empress Dowager is far from the virtuous woman she appears to be. I had always been afraid of death, and now my face was pale as a sheet. I trembled uncontrollably, so. Even before I entered the palace, the Empress already wanted to kill me. Xinyi gripped my hand tightly. As long as I'm here, no one can harm you. My eyes filled with tears as I looked at him. Will I die a miserable death in the palace? Xinye's hand trembled violently, probably recalling the horrific manner of my previous life's death. He held me tightly in his arms. No. No. Such a thing will never happen again. Xinyi seemed even more afraid of the intrigues within the harem than I was. This morning, after paying my respects to the Empress, she bestowed many gifts upon me. Xinyi accompanied me back to the sleeping chambers and had the items inspected one by one. Soon, they discovered poison in a box of lip balm. The court physician who tested the poison said, although the amount of poison in this box of lip balm is minimal, if Lady Shufei were to use it over time, she would eventually die from blood rushing to her head. I was so frightened that I collapsed onto the soft couch, muttering in a daze, what have I done to offend her? Is it because I resemble my aunt? Xinyi glared at the box of lip balm in the physician's hands, his face growing paler by the second. I suddenly grabbed his arm and spoke urgently. Your Majesty, yesterday I encountered a mad old maid in the Imperial Garden. She rushed up to me, called me Miss, and said that one must never touch anything in the palace, or else one would lose one's mind. I thought she was just rambling, but now that I think about it, what she said seems to make some sense. Upon hearing this, Xinye's face drained of all color, and his piercing black eyes seemed to lose focus. After a long moment, he spoke in a hoarse voice. Go find the person the Empress Dowager mentioned. Soon, Xiao Hong was brought into the sleeping chamber. In my previous life, she grew up with me and entered the palace as a maidservant in my dowry. Before I lost my mind, I foresaw that I would fall out of favor and arranged for her to leave the palace and marry someone else. However, she feared that no one would take care of me after she left, so she deceived me while I was unconscious, claiming she was a newly assigned palace maid sent to serve me, and stayed by my side. After my death, she was exiled to perform hard labor. At that time, the entire harem was under the Empress's control, and the palace attendants who guarded her knew she had been my senior maid, so they treated her with extra cruelty. Xiao Hong is only 34 years old, but she already has many white hairs. Yesterday, I encountered her cleaning the ditches in the Imperial Garden. Only then did I realize that this foolish girl had sacrificed her entire life to care for me. Xiao Hong raised her eyes to look at me, and her eyes immediately turned red. At the eunuch's reminder, she finally reacted and knelt down to pay her respects. Xinyi narrowed his eyes and examined her. I remember you were once a maid who served by the side of the wrong noble consort. How did you end up doing hard labor? This servant was the attendant maid of the wrong noble consort. Xiao Hong lowered her eyes and replied, it's probably because someone in the palace hates the concubine so much that even after she's gone, they're still trying to humiliate those around her. Xinyi continued, why did you say those things to the concubine yesterday? Xiao Hong knelt on the ground, staring at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Over the years, I have thought every day that the Empress consort, after her miscarriage, was merely overwhelmed with grief. How could she suddenly have nightmares that caused her to lose her mind? The emperor comes every day to dine with the empress consort, so no one would dare to tamper with her food. Therefore, they must have tampered with the items she uses daily. Yesterday, I saw Lady Shufei and mistook her for the empress. I was afraid the empress would be harmed again, so I said those words. She repeated exactly what I had taught her to say yesterday. Xinyan turned to the eunuch beside him, the items in the empress's palace. The eunuch hurriedly replied. The empress said that the emperor would see them and be reminded of her, so she ordered all the palace attendants to dispose of them. Only a few items that the emperor kept by his side remain. Xinyi glared at the box of lip balm on the table, then suddenly laughed coldly. I suppose they also laced the empress's items with poison. Xiao Hong seemed to remember something and bowed her head forcefully. This servant remembers that after the Empress Dowager's miscarriage, the scent of the perfume she used daily seemed different. This servant asked the Imperial Household Department about it, and they said it was because rose essence had been added to the perfume. This servant did not think much of it at the time. Xinyi closed his eyes and said, "Investigate." The death of Rong Guifei was a taboo subject for Xinyi, and no one in the palace dared to mention it. I used a box of lip balm I had laced with poison to uncover this old case. However, the Duke had once saved Xinye's life and was also the foremost contributor to his ascension to the throne. Xinyan, out of gratitude for the Duke's kindness and to avoid being labeled as heartless and ungrateful, preserved the Empress's title and imprisoned her in the cunning palace. My life in my previous life only bought the Empress's confinement. Xiao Hong felt it was unfair for me. However, this was the outcome I desired. The Empress, because of the stab I inflicted on her before I died, lost her most cherished beauty, causing Xinyan to despise her for 16 years. Now, the Empress's position, which she obtained through her maternal family's influence, has become nothing but an empty shell. In the harem, one must always kowtow to the powerful and trample on the weak. This once noble empress must fall from her lofty position into the mud to truly understand what it means to be humiliated. What's the point of dying and ending it all? I must keep her alive so I can gradually repay the debt from my previous life. The incense burner emitted swirling wisps of smoke, and a few rays of slanting sunlight filtered through the window lattice. I sat at the dressing table combing my hair when Xiao Hong entered the room carrying a tray of pastries. If I were still alive in my previous life, this is how I would have lived, dependent on Xiao Hong, leading a quiet yet lonely existence. After 2 lifetimes, Xiao Hong has returned to serve me once more. However, now everyone calls her Hong Yu the wet nurse, and her eyes no longer hold the innocence of the past. The Empress is crying out in innocence, saying that the poison in the lady's lip balm was not put there by her. What did the Emperor say? The Emperor naturally doesn't believe her, saying that the young lady is so young. How could she have such deep schemes? Xiao Hong paused. Now the Empress isn't demanding to see the Emperor anymore. She must want him to remember her beautiful appearance. I raised an eyebrow. So, her face is completely ruined? Xiao Hong nodded. Over the years, the Emperor has neglected her, and she thought it was because of the scar on her face. That's why she's been tormenting herself in every way possible. Now she doesn't have to anymore. I flipped through the ledgers and asked, "Has anyone visited her recently?" The Crown Prince pleaded with the Emperor for mercy and visited her yesterday. I heard he brought her some medicinal ointment for her wounds. I smiled. I had forgotten that she still had the Crown Prince to rely on. The Empress still cared so much about her face. Even while imprisoned, she had the Duke's mansion send her ointments worth a fortune and had the Crown Prince search far and wide for renowned doctors. By the time they remembered me, I had already begun assisting with the affairs of the 6 palaces using the accounting skills my father had taught me. Shen Huaiyan came to find me several times, but I refused to see him. He was still as devoted to me as ever, even renouncing his position as Crown Prince. In his letters, he said he wanted to elope with me and leave this imperial palace. On a quiet night, I finally went to meet him. He had changed into a guard's uniform, his sunken eyes and gaunt appearance making him look haggard. You are now the Emperor's woman, aren't you? Shen Huaiyan looked at me and asked cautiously. You know you look so much like Roan Guifei. Why did you come to the palace with me to see the Emperor? Like Shen Yu, he had deep, loving eyes. I blushed and pretended to be innocent. I wore a veil when I entered the palace. I never thought my face would look so much like my aunt's. His dark eyes grew deep. My mother said you framed her. You're only approaching me out of calculation. You're just trying to avenge your aunt. I forced a smile. When I first met your highness, I was only 8 years old. Did I start plotting against you back then? Upon hearing this, Shen Huaiyan's brows relaxed slightly. I raised my eyes and looked at him with a hint of reproach. It was the Emperor who forced me. I don't want to be trapped in this palace for the rest of my life. Are you really here to take me away? He asked me in a hoarse voice. Yun Mei, have you ever truly loved me? I forced a smile and said, I would even give my life to be with you. I am the crown prince. I bear too much responsibility. Shen Huaiyan raised his hand to gently stroke my cheek. His eyes filled with devotion and reluctance. Song Yun Mei, you are the first woman I have ever loved. Yet I must let you go. His rough palm gently caressed my neck. Before he could tighten his grip, the golden hairpin in my hand plunged deeply into his heart. Shen Huaiyan's pupils contracted sharply. I looked up at his expression of disbelief. How foolish do you think I am? To believe a man's true feelings again? Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. You. The Empress was right. I approached you out of calculation. I leaned closer, speaking in a voice only the two of us could hear. The prince doesn't know yet, but I've already planted spies in the Empress's palace. I knew that Shen Huaiyan had sworn to kill me with tears in his eyes to secure his position as crown prince and allow the Empress to regain power. The moment I pulled out the golden hairpin, Shen Huaiyan collapsed to the ground. I took a step back, tore at my clothes, and dug my nails into my arms, screaming, Help! Help me! The night patrol guards nearby arrived quickly. As the torchlight illuminated Shen Huaiyan's face, everyone froze. The one who had dared to touch the Emperor's favorite concubine in the dead of night was none other than the current crown prince. Shen Yi arrived at my chambers shortly after. I removed my hairpin, knelt on the ground, and pleaded for forgiveness. Under my white robe, faint bruises could be seen. My entire body trembled as I shed tears of sorrow. Your Majesty, I did not know that was the crown prince. I only wanted to protect my own purity, which is why I accidentally injured the crown prince. Xin Yu's expression flickered. Why did you go out so late? Xiao Hong approached with a jade bottle. The Empress was worried about the Emperor's cough and remembered a secret remedy from her hometown. She needed to collect water from bamboo leaves at night to boil the medicine. She spent 2 nights gathering it to get this bottle. But tonight she unexpectedly encountered the crown prince. Xin Yi helped me to my feet, his eyes filled with pity. Someone was trying to harm you. It's not your fault. Hearing this, I threw myself into his arms, tears streaming down my cheeks. The crown prince said he would ruin my reputation. I'm so afraid the Emperor will abandon me. Xin Yi lowered his head and kissed my forehead. How could that be? Just then, a eunuch rushed in, panting and out of breath. Your Majesty, the crown prince. The crown prince. He's severely injured and has passed away. Xin Ye's body stiffened, and after a long moment, he spoke in a hoarse voice. He deserves to die. I leaned against him, my lips curling into a cold smile. Xin Yi, to preserve the palace's reputation, told everyone that the crown prince had accidentally fallen into the water and drowned. The Empress naturally did not believe this, and she soon discovered the true cause of the crown prince's death. Now she wanted nothing more than to grind my bones to dust. The empress had spent years cultivating influence in the harem. And even though she had fallen from power, she still had many loyal followers. After dealing with several palace maids who had attempted to assassinate me, I grew weary and went to the cunning palace to see the empress. By then, her right cheek had completely rotted away, and she could only cover it with her scattered long hair. The once beautiful empress now looked like a madwoman. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she glared at me fiercely. "It's all your fault. You whore. You killed Yennefer, and you dare to come here?" I adjusted the hairpin on my bun and smiled softly. This morning I felt unwell, so I summoned the imperial physician to take my pulse. He said I am pregnant. The empress's eyes burned with hatred, almost spilling blood. "You came here to tell me that my son is dead, yet you have a child in your womb?" The imperial physician reported to His Majesty that I am 1 month pregnant. But in truth, the child in my womb is nearly 2 months old. I gently stroked my abdomen and smiled, lowering my eyes. After the crown prince passed away, the emperor's cough grew worse. It took a month to recover. She stared at my abdomen, dazed, murmuring, "It's Yennefer. This is Yennefer's child?" I smiled faintly, saying nothing. The empress raised her eyes to meet mine. "Why did you tell me this?" I raised an eyebrow. "Your Majesty, I am known for my fear of death. Of course I hope the empress will spare my life." The empress's body stiffened, and the shard of porcelain she had hidden in her hand cut open her palm, blood flowing down her wrist. How ridiculous. She wanted to devour me alive. Yet she couldn't kill me. After all, the child in my womb was the only bloodline her son had left in this world. From then on, the empress no longer obsessed over taking my life. Her pent-up hatred had no outlet, and she finally remembered who she should hate. It was Xinyan who, disregarding their years of marital bond, had imprisoned her in the cold and desolate cunning palace, subjecting her to endless humiliation. It was Xinyan who, for the sake of a woman, abandoned her son and let him die under mysterious circumstances. It was Xinyan who had driven her to this desperate state. Soon, she found an opportunity for revenge. The border was under siege, and the imperial court dispatched troops from the capital to defend the frontiers. The only forces left to guard the capital were the city garrison under her brother Shuangwen's command. As night fell, the rebel forces breached the palace gates and quickly reached my chambers. Shuangwen sat on his horse, pointed his sword at me, and ordered his men, "Slash her face to pieces and take her away. Remember to be gentle, don't disturb the empress's pregnancy." I stood there and smiled faintly at him, saying, "I deceived the empress. The child in my womb is not Shuangwen's. The Shui family will have no place in this world." "What did you say?" Shuangwen froze for a moment, glaring at me with hatred. "So what? All the princes in this palace are my elder sister's children. Since that is the case, there is no need to spare you." His eyes widened in fury as he raised his sword to strike me. Suddenly, a shower of arrows rained down. Shuangwen was pierced by countless arrows and died instantly. I stared at his eyes, which had not yet closed, and smiled. Today's events were nothing more than a trap to lure him into a trap. The border garrisons had never requested reinforcements from the court. When the empress was plotting the rebellion, Xinyan had already laid out his plans. I withdrew my gaze, reached into my waist, and swallowed 2 pills. Soon, blood trickled down my thighs, soaking my skirt and dripping onto the brick floor. The screams of panicked maids echoed around me. "Oh no! The empress is bleeding. Quick! Summon the imperial physician. Quickly!" I collapsed to the ground, my vision blurred by a blood-stained veil. Before losing consciousness, I saw Xinyan's face turn deathly pale as he stumbled toward me. Upon seeing the pool of blood beneath me, he suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. He had longed for this child for so long. He even told others that the child he had with Io had returned. How could he say such a thing? In my previous life, he had given me those cold medicines, which ruined my body and caused the child to die in the womb. He was the one who killed my child. The child could never return. After my miscarriage, Xinyan fell seriously ill. He managed to handle the affairs of the Duke's mansion, but his body was completely broken. My body recovered quickly, and I went to his bedside every day to tend to his medicine. He grew to trust me more and more, no longer avoiding me when discussing state affairs with ministers, and even asked me which prince I wanted to be crown prince. I paused for a moment and said, "Then His Majesty should choose the fifth prince." He drank the medicine I fed him and asked, "Why?" I gently set down the medicine bowl. "His birth mother, Lady E, has a calm temperament. If she manages the harem, our lives as concubines won't be too difficult. I will have you raise the fifth prince and make you the empress." I lowered my eyes. This concubine does not wish to raise another's child. He placed his hand on mine. "We will have our own children in the future." I shook my head. "Childbirth is too painful. I don't want to have children anymore." Xinyi looked at me with a dazed expression, but soon fell into a deep sleep. The next day, when he awoke, he registered the fifth prince under my name and issued an edict proclaiming him crown prince. After my miscarriage, I was granted the title of noble consort, and my elevation to empress was now imminent. Such immense favor made the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion the envy of the capital, overshadowing all the princes and nobles in the city. This prompted my younger brother from my previous life, who had been spoiled rotten by our mother, to cause more trouble. When I visited Xinyi, I mentioned the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion to him. The Marquis of Ningyuan caused a scandal over a courtesan, resulting in several deaths. I had the Ministry of Justice execute him. Xinye's expression grew cold. He was Io's younger brother and the only son of the Ningyuan Marquis' mansion. I sneered, "Such a beast who tarnished his aunt's reputation, why keep him alive?" Xinyi closed his eyes. "You are too heartless. Indeed, you still cannot compare to Io. The emperor is correct. I am indeed heartless." I smiled and asked him, "Did the emperor hear the screams of a woman last night?" He stared at me without speaking, so I answered on my own. When the emperor ordered the empress's execution, she had already gone mad and lost her mind. I didn't want her to die so unjustly, so I replaced the poison meant for her. She suffered for 2 hours, until her internal organs rotted away. "Your Majesty, do you think she was conscious before she died?" Xinyi looked at me with a growing sense of strangeness. She had already suffered so much humiliation. "Why did you have to torment her like this?" I laughed coldly. "Because I hate her. Not only that, but I also hate you. I was only pretending to be pregnant. Yet you fell ill like this. It seems you truly have feelings for me. Your Majesty, please keep your mind calm. Otherwise, the blood rushing to your head will cause you to die suddenly." He snapped back to reality, clutching his chest and gazing at me. His once loving eyes were now filled with blood. "You poisoned me. You poisonous woman. This poison was prepared for you before I entered the palace." I lowered my eyes to wipe my hands, then smiled. "If you hadn't been poisoned, why would you be so angry that you fell ill?" Blood gushed from his mouth and nose. He opened his mouth but couldn't make a sound. I laughed. "I've sent all the palace attendants away. Your Majesty, you should save your strength." He couldn't speak, so he could only listen to me. "I remember. Your Majesty's greatest wish was to be buried with Ronguefe after death, and to be husband and wife in the next life. But yesterday, I already dug up her body and that of her child, scattered their ashes into the lake, and you two will never meet again in the next life. However, I will bury you with the Empress, so that you two will be together forever and never part." Xinyi stared at me intently, coughing up a mouthful of black blood. With his last ounce of strength, he managed to say one sentence. I made a mistake. You're not Io. She wouldn't be so cruel. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, but I am her. Yi Gonggong. Shin Ye's dilated pupils suddenly contracted. In my previous life, during our first night together, I waited for him for a long time. Through the layers of curtains, I whispered to the indistinct figure. May I ask, eunuch, will the emperor come tonight? The man did not respond. I asked again. Eunuch, how should I address you? He didn't respond. So I asked again. How should I address you? He said. You. Yi Gonggong. May I ask? I looked up and saw Shinyu, dressed in bright yellow, smiling at me. Only the two of us knew about this. Before he died from the poison, Shinyu finally recognized me. When the new emperor ascended the throne, everyone thought I would become the Empress Dowager. However, news spread throughout the palace that I had suddenly fallen ill and died. The new emperor's biological mother, Lady E, was honored as the Empress Dowager. Before I left the palace, I saw her once. I smiled and asked her, all the women in the palace hate me. Why don't you hate me? She shook her head and said, perhaps it's because you resemble Muyao so much that I cannot bring myself to hate you. I curved my lips toward her and said, I have yet to thank you on behalf of my aunt for arranging for many of her people to be placed by her side after her death. Unfortunately, that girl Xiao Hong was closely watched, and I never had the chance to let her leave the palace. But it's for the best now, she can follow you and leave. She looked up at me and asked, are you leaving like this? Aren't you afraid your enemies will come looking for revenge? Enemies? All my enemies are dead. I smiled at her. My mother didn't want me to spend my whole life in the palace. So I have to leave. I left the capital with Xiao Hong. I told her that I had a home now. And so did she. In the quiet mountain village, wisps of smoke drifted in the wind. Father sat in the courtyard, counting on an abacus. Mother brought the dishes to the table and sighed to father. I wonder if Mayor is suffering out there. When she looked up again, her movements froze. I stood at the courtyard gate, tears welling in my eyes. Father, Mother, I'm back. The withered tree in the courtyard sprouted new green buds, and the wind swept fallen flowers across the steps. Father and Mother didn't ask a single question. They only said to me, as long as you're back. The end.